You weren't supposed to come here, Mom. Sophie's voice cut through the mountain air like a blade sliding between ribs. She stood framed in the doorway of my lodge, my sanctuary, wearing one of Richard's old cashmere scarves draped around her neck like a trophy. In her hand, she gripped the sterling silver coffee mug Richard had commissioned for our 30th anniversary, steam rising from what I knew to be my imported Ethiopian blend. My name is Lily Marsden. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a retired interior designer, and until this moment, I believed I was a good mother. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get to the story. I had spent 3 decades building this mountain lodge with my late husband, every stone chosen, every beam placed with intention. This place wasn't just property. It was the architecture of our love, the last place I heard Richard laugh. But as my tires crunched up the private gravel drive, I saw them. Cars. 3 of them, parked haphazardly in my clearing. Daniel's sedan, the one I'd helped him finance. Sophie's Range Rover, the one my emergency loan had rescued from repossession. And a battered minivan I didn't recognize. I had told no one I was coming. Yes, I'd given Daniel the gate code years ago, for emergencies. Never, not in my darkest imaginings, did I think he'd interpret emergency access as bring your in-laws and move in. The front door wasn't locked. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The warmth hit me first. Then the noise, television blaring, children shrieking, adult laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The air smelled wrong. Grease from takeout containers. Synthetic air freshener. The layered smell of people who had been living here for weeks, not hours. In the great room, I counted 7 people. My son Daniel sat on the leather sofa I'd imported from Italy. Sophie's parents, Marjorie and Henry Alden, occupied the matching armchairs, wine glasses in hand. 2 younger people sprawled on the Persian rug I'd bought in Istanbul. And a toddler I'd never met careened around the coffee table, leaving sticky prints on glass Richard had installed himself. But what stopped my heart was the wall above the fireplace. My wedding portrait, the black and white photograph that had hung there for 30 years, was gone. In its place hung an oversized canvas print, Sophie and Daniel's wedding photo, flanked by studio portraits of the Alden family. My history, erased. Their narrative, installed. For a long moment, no one noticed me. Then Daniel's head turned. Our eyes met. And instead of surprise or shame, what I saw in my son's face was annoyance. Sophie's mother stood, flustered. Oh. Daniel, darling, I thought you said your mother was traveling through Europe until February? How lovely that you're back early, Lily. The floor tilted beneath me. Europe? I looked at my son, whose gaze slid away. They had lied. To everyone. I haven't been anywhere, I said quietly. And I never gave anyone permission to live here. Sophie appeared from the kitchen, my anniversary mug in her hand, her expression shifting from surprise to defiance. You weren't supposed to come here, Mom. What did you just say? The question emerged cold and precise. Sophie's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but the moment passed quickly. I said you weren't supposed to be here, she repeated. Daniel told us you were spending the holidays in Denver. You hate being alone in the mountains in winter. The audacity took my breath away. In my own home, holding my dead husband's mug, she was explaining to me what I had supposedly said. I never said any such thing. I stepped further into the room. And Daniel, when exactly did you tell your wife and her family that they could move into my lodge? We didn't move in, Mom. Daniel's voice carried that tone I'd come to know too well, the one that said I was being dramatic. We're just using the place for a few weeks. You weren't here. The house was empty. You thought that because I'm grieving, that meant you could take whatever you wanted from mine? Marjorie set down her wine glass. Lily, dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel said you'd offered them the lodge. He said you felt it was going to waste, just sitting here empty. Mrs. Alden, I can assure you, there was no such conversation. If my son told you otherwise, then he lied. Mom. Daniel finally stood, his face flushing. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. And don't insult Sophie's family. Your guests, I repeated slowly. In my house. That I own. Where's my rug? The Persian one that was under that coffee table? Silence. We rolled it up, Sophie said. It clashed with the furniture we brought in. It's in the upstairs closet. You brought in furniture. I could see it now, a cheap entertainment center, a massive television. You brought your own furniture into my home and stored mine away. We needed more seating, Sophie explained. Your place was lovely, Mom, but it wasn't really set up for a family. I walked past her, into the kitchen. My copper cookware had been shoved into lower cabinets, replaced with non-stick pans still bearing price tags. The refrigerator was packed with cheap beer, frozen pizzas, economy-sized juice. And on the counter sat a slow cooker I'd never seen, crusty with old food. We've been cooking family meals, Sophie said behind me. We were going to surprise you with the improvements when you got back from your trip. What trip, Sophie? Your trip to Europe. You told Daniel. I told Daniel nothing. I haven't spoken to my son in 3 weeks. The realization landed like a stone. I didn't realize he was busy lying so you could squat in my home. Her face hardened. We're not squatting. We're family. This place was sitting here empty while you rattled around in Denver all alone. It seemed selfish. Selfish. I had paid for Daniel's education. Co-signed his first lease. Bailed him out of debt twice. Given Sophie a loan to start her boutique. Paid for their wedding photographer. And using my private retreat to heal was selfish. Get out, I said quietly. Sophie laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Excuse me? I said get out. All of you. Mom, you're being ridiculous. Daniel appeared in the doorway. We can't just leave. It's Christmas Eve. There's a storm coming. We've got a toddler. You should have thought of that before you broke into my home. We didn't break in. I used the code you gave me. For emergencies, Daniel. Not for moving your wife's entire family in. Henry Alden joined the crowd, his face red. Now just a minute. We've been here for 2 weeks, keeping the pipes from freezing, shoveling snow. 2 weeks? I breathed. Then, looking at Daniel, how long have you been here? He wouldn't meet my eyes. 6 weeks. The number hit like a physical blow. 6 weeks. While I'd been calling him, texting him, worried about his silence. 6 weeks. And you never thought to ask permission? I was going to tell you after Christmas. When you were in a better place emotionally. Don't you dare use my grief as an excuse for your theft. Theft? Sophie's voice went shrill. You're being dramatic and cruel. I think this is about control. You can't stand that Daniel's finally building a life with me. If that's what you need to tell yourself somewhere else. I want all of you out within the hour. Or what? Sophie's eyes glittered. You'll call the police? On your own son? On Christmas Eve? I pulled out my phone. Yes. Genuine uncertainty flickered across Sophie's face. Daniel stepped forward, hands raised. Mom, please. Let's talk about this like adults. You're upset, and you have every right to be. But it's late, it's Christmas Eve. Let us stay the night. Tomorrow we'll figure out a rental agreement. No. The word was final. I watched my son finally understand that his charm wouldn't work this time. My name is Lily. Mrs. Marsden if you prefer. But I am not your mom right now. I am the owner of this property, and you are trespassers. You have 1 hour. If you're not gone, I will call the police. Marjorie moved first. Henry, get our suitcases. We're leaving. Her voice was tight with humiliation. She turned to Sophie. I want to know exactly what you told us was true and what was lies. But not here. Daniel stood frozen, caught between his mother and his wife. Sophie grabbed his arm. We're not leaving. We have rights, squatters' rights. Colorado requires 18 years for adverse possession, I said calmly. You have no rights here. You have 55 minutes. Daniel's face crumpled. Where are we supposed to go? Our house is rented out, that's how we've been paying the mortgage. You should have thought of that before. Sophie made a sound of fury. Fine. We'll leave. But don't expect to ever meet your grandchildren. Don't expect Christmas cards or any relationship at all. The manipulation was blatant. But something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped. You're the ones who chose to lie. To steal. To violate my home. I'm simply choosing to have boundaries. I walked past them and began straightening. I took down the Alden family photos, stacking them on the coffee table. I collected wine glasses, beer bottles, and scattered toys. Behind me, I heard them gathering. Arguing in whispers. 45 minutes later, the house was silent. I watched the taillights disappear down the drive. Daniel left without saying goodbye. Sophie slammed the door. When the red glow vanished into the trees, I locked the door. The deadbolt sliding home sounded like finality. I walked through my house, cataloging damage. They'd slept in my bed. Sophie's makeup cluttered my dresser. I stripped the sheets with shaking hands, carrying them to the trash. In the basement, I found my Persian rug rolled in a corner, along with boxes of my belongings, photo albums, Richard's vinyl records, my grandmother's china. They'd stored away my life to make room for theirs. I sat on the basement stairs and cried. Deep, racking sobs for Richard, for the son I'd raised, for my own naivety. When the tears subsided, I went to work. I dragged their furniture to the porch. Restored my own pieces. Unrolled my rug. Retrieved my wedding photo from the basement and hung it back above the fireplace. I'm sorry, I whispered to Richard's image. I should have protected this place better. But I will now. By midnight, the house looked like itself again. My phone buzzed. Daniel, I hope you're happy. You just destroyed our family. Merry Christmas. I deleted the message. Sophie, this isn't over. We have lawyers. I blocked her number. Daniel again, Mom, please. We have nowhere to go. I turned off my phone entirely. The silence was profound. Just the fire crackling, wind through pines, my own breathing. I pulled Richard's blanket around my shoulders and settled into the chair. Tomorrow I would change the locks. Call my lawyer. Document everything. But tonight, I sat in the silence I'd driven 4 hours to find. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something that wasn't grief. I felt clarity. The snow continued falling, covering tire tracks and footprints, slowly erasing the evidence that anyone else had ever been here. In the morning, everything would look clean again. Fresh. Ready to begin again. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It sounded like peace. It sounded like mine. The morning light came pale and cold through the windows I'd scrubbed at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to stop erasing their presence. I stood in the great room with my second cup of coffee, staring at the space above the fireplace where my wedding portrait now hung again, slightly crooked because my hands had been shaking when I rehung it. The house was quiet. Mine again. But the silence felt different than I'd expected. Not peaceful. Haunted. I walked slowly through each room, cataloging what I hadn't noticed in last night's shock and fury. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where I'd always kept my recipe cards, handwritten notes from Richard's mother, my grandmother, friends from decades past. Gone. Replaced with takeout menus and grocery store coupons clipped by someone else's hand. The spice rack Richard had built for our 10th anniversary stood reorganized, my alphabetized system destroyed. Cardamom shoved next to salt. Vanilla extract beside red pepper flakes. Small violations, but each one felt deliberate, as if my organizational logic, my presence, had been something to erase. I moved to the living room and studied the walls more carefully. Where framed photographs of our life had hung, Richard and me on our honeymoon in Greece, Daniel as a baby, family portraits spanning decades, there were now pictures of people I barely knew. Sophie's parents on a beach. Her siblings at someone's graduation. An enormous canvas print of Sophie and Daniel's wedding that must have cost more than they'd ever repaid me. When had this happened? 6 weeks, Daniel had said. 6 weeks of living here, and in that time they'd systematically removed every trace of Richard and me, replacing our history with theirs like we were previous tenants whose lease had expired. I sank onto the sofa, the Italian leather one I'd saved for 2 years to buy, and let myself remember. 32 years ago, Richard and I had driven up this same mountain road in a borrowed truck, the deed to 5 acres of raw land burning in my purse like a promise. We'd been married 8 years. Daniel was 3. And we decided we needed a sanctuary, a place that was just ours, away from the city, away from the demands of work and parenthood and ordinary life. Right there, Richard had said, pointing to a clearing surrounded by young pines. That's where we build. We'd spent that first summer camping on the property, Daniel playing in the creek while Richard and I drew plans in the dirt with sticks, dreaming bigger than our budget allowed. We did most of the work ourselves. Richard laid every stone in that fireplace by hand, his knuckles bleeding, his back aching, but his face bright with purpose. I'd sewn the curtains on my mother's old machine. We'd installed the windows together, Richard on the outside, me on the inside, our hands meeting through the empty frames. We'd planted the aspens by the creek one anniversary, the pines along the drive another. Every inch of this place was built with our hands, our money, our dreams. And they'd treated it like a vacation rental. Like something disposable. I set down my coffee and walked upstairs to the master bedroom, the room I'd avoided last night. The bed I'd stripped still sat bare, the mattress exposed like a wound. Sophie's clothes hung in the closet where Richard's had been. Her makeup cluttered the dresser where his cufflinks used to rest in the wooden box I'd given him. On the nightstand, my nightstand, sat a book I didn't recognize, Manifesting Abundance, How to Claim What's Yours. A bookmark protruded from a chapter titled, Overcoming Guilt About Receiving. The irony was breathtaking. I pulled open the dresser drawers. Daniel's socks and underwear in the top drawer. Sophie's intimates in the second. In the bottom drawer, shoved carelessly beneath a pile of Daniel's sweaters, I found what made my breath stop. My sketchbook. The leather-bound one Richard had given me on our last anniversary together, already sick but pretending he wasn't, his hands shaking as he wrapped it. Inside were my private drawings, studies of the lodge, sketches of Richard's hands, ideas for a redesign of the kitchen I'd been planning before he died. Someone had torn out pages. I could see the ragged edges where drawings had been ripped free. The remaining pages were smudged, bent, treated carelessly. And at the back, stuffed between the last pages, I found loose papers covered in Sophie's handwriting. Vision Board, Mountain Lodge Project. Beneath the title, she'd listed renovations. Remove old fireplace, install modern gas unit. Replace vintage fixtures with contemporary lighting. Paint over wood paneling, white or gray. Convert Richard's study into nursery. Monetize, Airbnb potential $300 to $500 per night. My hand started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the papers. They hadn't just moved in. They'd been planning. Planning to erase Richard's fireplace, the one he'd built stone by stone, the centerpiece of this entire house. Planning to convert his study, the room where he'd spent his last good months reading and listening to music. Planning to turn my grief sanctuary into an income property. I walked downstairs on legs that felt disconnected from my body. In the kitchen trash, the bin I'd emptied last night, I found confirmation. Beneath coffee grounds and takeout containers, someone had thrown away 3 torn pages from my sketchbook. My drawings of Richard's hands. Studies of his face. Private things. Intimate things. Thrown away like garbage. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I pulled the pages out, carefully cleaning them, my hands shaking with something beyond anger. This wasn't carelessness. This was erasure. Deliberate, calculated removal of my husband from his own home. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. 2 years ago, Daniel had called me in tears. His startup had failed. He owed $70,000 to investors. His credit was destroyed. He had nowhere to turn. I know I shouldn't ask, he'd said, voice breaking. I know you've already done so much. But Mom, I'm drowning. If you could just. I'd wired the money that afternoon. $70,000 from my retirement account. Money Richard and I had saved for decades. Money that was supposed to fund my security. You'll pay me back when you can, I'd said. No pressure. Just, be smarter next time. He'd promised he would. Sworn it. Hugged me so tight I could feel his gratitude. I never saw a penny of it again. 18 months ago, Sophie had come to me with a business plan for her boutique. Professional binder, PowerPoint presentation, projected revenues that seemed impossibly optimistic. I just need $30,000 for inventory and 6 months rent, she'd said, smiling that smile that made her look like a daughter I might have wanted. Daniel says you're so good with investments. This is a sure thing, Mom. I'd co-signed the loan. $30,000 I didn't have to give but gave anyway because I wanted her to like me. Wanted her to see me as supportive. Wanted to be the mother-in-law who said yes. The boutique closed in 4 months. The loan defaulted. My credit score dropped 100 points. Sophie never apologized, just mentioned casually one day that retail is harder than anyone realizes, and changed the subject. 6 months ago, they'd needed first and last month's rent on a new apartment. Their current landlord was evicting them for late payments. Just $5,000, Mom, Daniel had said. We'll pay you back from my next commission. I'd written the check. The commission never came. The payback never happened. And apparently, they'd used the apartment as a rental property for the holidays while squatting in my lodge. Each memory felt like a stone being placed on my chest. How had I not seen it? How had I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was what mothers did, that my generosity was building relationship instead of feeding parasites? Because Sophie had been so good at it. So skilled. I thought back to family dinners, to holidays, to the subtle ways she'd positioned herself. Always praising me in public, Lily's so generous, we're so lucky, while privately asking Daniel to make requests she knew I couldn't refuse. Always framing their needs as temporary emergencies while treating my resources as permanent solutions. And Daniel. My son, who I'd raised to be kind and honest and strong. When had he become this? When had he learned to weaponize my love? To use, Mom, please, like a key that opened every lock. I looked around the lodge, seeing it now through their eyes. Not a sanctuary built with love and labor. Not a memorial to a marriage. Just an asset. An empty property going to waste while I rattled around Denver all alone. Just something they deserved more than I did. The realization settled over me like snow, cold and complete, they didn't love me. Maybe they had once, but somewhere along the way, I'd become something else to them. Not a mother. Not a person. Just a resource to be managed, manipulated, and eventually consumed. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The morning was crystalline, the kind of cold that makes everything sharp and clear. Snow blanketed the clearing, unmarked except for deer tracks near the tree line. The cars were gone. The tire ruts from last night were already filling in with fresh powder. Soon, it would look like they'd never been here at all. I wrapped my arms around myself and looked up at the pine trees Richard and I had planted, now towering overhead. 30 years of growth. 30 years of roots going deep. Richard, I whispered into the cold air. You'd never believe this. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Richard would have believed it. He'd tried to warn me, gently, in those last months. You're too good to him, he'd said once, watching me write another check. You're teaching him that love means money. That need means obligation. Lily, sweetheart, you have to let him fall. You have to let him learn. He's our son, I'd replied. We help our son. We help him become a man who doesn't need us, Richard had said. Not a man who bleeds us dry. I dismissed it as worry, as the pessimism of a dying man trying to protect his wife. I'd promised myself I'd continue being generous, continue being supportive, continue being the mother who never said no. And look where it had brought me. Standing alone in the snow, my home violated, my trust shattered, my son's final words echoing, "You just destroyed our family." As if I had been the one to lie. To steal. To erase. I stood there until my fingers went numb and my breath formed clouds that disappeared into the brightening morning. Then I turned and went back inside, closing the door firmly behind me. The house was quiet. But for the first time, I heard what that silence was trying to tell me. It was time to stop giving. Time to stop sacrificing. Time to stop setting myself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. It was time, finally, to choose myself. I spent the morning restoring what I could, but the lodge felt like a crime scene. Every drawer I opened revealed new violations. Every closet held evidence of their long-term occupation. By noon, I'd filled 3 trash bags with their forgotten belongings, cheap toiletries, Sophie's fashion magazines, children's toys I didn't recognize. I was carrying the 3rd bag to the porch when I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach dropped. Through the window, I watched Daniel's sedan pull into the clearing, followed closely by the Aldens' minivan. They were coming back. All of them. I set down the trash bag and stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as they climbed out of their vehicles. Daniel looked haggard, like he hadn't slept. Sophie's face was set in determined lines. But it was Henry Alden who approached first, his barrel chest puffed out, his expression radiating indignation. "Mrs. Marsden," he said, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about last night." "I agree," I said calmly. "You can start by explaining why you're trespassing on my property." His face reddened. "Trespassing? Now hold on just a minute. We've been maintaining this place for weeks. Shoveling snow, keeping the heat running, making sure the pipes didn't freeze. The way I see it, you ought to be thanking us, not throwing us out in a snowstorm on Christmas Eve." The sheer audacity of it momentarily robbed me of speech. "Thanking you," I repeated slowly. "For living in my house without permission?" "We had permission," Sophie interjected, stepping forward. Her eyes were red-rimmed but her voice was steady. "Daniel told us you'd lent him the lodge. That you were traveling abroad and wanted family to use it instead of letting it sit empty." I turned to my son. "Is that what you told them, Daniel?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. I said you weren't using it. That you'd gone to Denver after Dad died and hadn't been back. I might have implied that you were okay with us staying here." Implied. The word tasted bitter. "You might have implied I was traveling internationally and had lent you my private property indefinitely." "Don't twist his words," Sophie snapped. "You weren't using this place. You haven't been here in almost a year. You have that huge house in Denver, 4 bedrooms for 1 person. Meanwhile, we're crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment, struggling with mortgage payments, trying to build a life. Why should this beautiful lodge just rot while you refuse to let go of the past?" The air seemed to contract. "Let go of the past," I echoed quietly. "You mean let go of my husband? Let go of the home we built together? I mean stop being selfish." Sophie's voice rose. "You're hoarding resources you don't even use. This place could be an asset. It could help the family. But instead, you cling to it like some kind of shrine, and for what? He's dead, Mom. Richard's dead. This house isn't bringing him back. The cruelty of it hit like a slap. Behind Sophie, even Marjorie Alden winced. Sophie, Daniel said weakly. That's not. It's the truth, Sophie cut him off. Someone needs to say it. She's been wallowing for a year while we've been drowning. And when we finally took initiative, when we finally tried to make use of a resource that was going to waste, she acts like we committed some crime. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. You took initiative. Is that what we're calling breaking into someone's home now? We didn't break in. Daniel's voice cracked with frustration. I had the code. You gave it to me. For emergencies, Daniel. How many times do I have to say it? This was an emergency. He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture so reminiscent of Richard when he was stressed that it made my chest ache. We were behind on rent. Sophie's boutique failed. My commissions have been terrible. We were about to be evicted, Mom. We had nowhere to go. What was I supposed to do, let my wife and her family become homeless while your lodge sat empty? You were supposed to ask me, I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to control it. You were supposed to call your mother and tell her the truth. Not lie to everyone, move in without permission, and redecorate like you owned the place. Redecorate? Sophie laughed sharply. We made improvements. This place was stuck in the 90s. Those heavy curtains, the dated furniture, all those depressing old photographs everywhere. Those photographs were of my life. My marriage. My history. Well, they were bringing down the whole aesthetic, Sophie said dismissively. The feng shui was terrible. I was doing you a favor. I stared at her, this woman my son had married, and saw her clearly for the first time. She genuinely believed she was right. In her mind, she'd improved my property, done me a service, taken better care of it than I could. My grief was inconvenient. My ownership was an obstacle. My attachment to my own home was selfishness. Where are my photographs now? I asked quietly. Sophie waved a hand vaguely. Boxed up somewhere. The basement, maybe? I'm not sure. We had to make room for our things. Your things. In my house. Oh, for God's sake. Sophie's patience snapped. Are you going to keep saying my house like that makes you better than us? Yes, it's legally yours. We know that. But morally? Ethically? You have way more than you need while we have less than we deserve. This lodge should be shared. It should be family property, not your personal grief museum. Henry Alden nodded vigorously. The girl makes a good point. In our family, we believe in sharing resources. Taking care of each other. Not hoarding property while younger generations struggle. Then perhaps, I said coldly, your family should purchase their own property to share. Marjorie Alden had been silent until now, but she stepped forward, her face arranged in an expression of patient concern. Lily, dear, I think everyone's emotions are running a bit high. Why don't we all go inside, sit down, have some coffee, and discuss this rationally? You're welcome to join us for lunch. I made a lovely roast, there's plenty. But please, let's not make a scene out here in front of the baby. The condescension in her voice, the casual assumption that I was the one making a scene, that I should be grateful for an invitation to lunch in my own home, made something inside me go very still and very cold. Mrs. Alden, I said quietly, I'm not a guest here. You are. And you're no longer welcome. Now that's just ridiculous, Henry blustered. We drove all the way back here to settle this like adults. The least you can do is hear us out. I heard you out last night. You left. Why are you back? Daniel stepped forward, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. Because you can't just throw us out, Mom. We have rights. We've been living here for 6 weeks. That establishes residency. You can't just kick out residents without proper notice. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? This man who'd weaponized legal terminology against his own mother? You think you have residency rights, I said slowly. In a property you entered without permission, where you pay no rent, where you lied about having authorization to be here? We've been maintaining it, Henry repeated. That's compensation. You've been using it. Using my electricity, my heat, my water. Eating my food. Sleeping in my bed. That's not maintenance. That's theft. Sophie's eyes flashed. There she goes again with the dramatic language. Theft. Breaking in. You're making us sound like criminals when all we did was make use of an empty house that was going to waste. It wasn't empty, I said, my voice rising despite myself. It was full. Full of memories, full of my marriage, full of the life Richard and I built. Just because you couldn't see that doesn't mean it wasn't there. Memories don't pay property taxes, Sophie shot back. Memories don't justify keeping a valuable asset locked away while family struggles. Family, I repeated. Is that what you think you are? Family asks permission. Family shows respect. Family doesn't throw away someone's private sketches or replace their wedding portrait or plan to get their husband's handmade fireplace. Sophie's face went pale. You found that? Your vision board? Yes. Convert Richard's study into a nursery. Turn my grief sanctuary into an Airbnb. Remove the fireplace he built with his own hands. I took a step toward her. Were you going to ask permission for any of that? Or were you just going to present it as a fait accompli once you'd established your residency rights? I was brainstorming, Sophie stammered. Just ideas. I wasn't going to actually. You threw away my sketches of Richard, I interrupted. My private drawings. You threw them in the trash like garbage. They were just in a drawer, Sophie protested. I didn't know they were important. And we needed the space for our things. In my drawer. In my house. That you broke into. We didn't, Daniel started, but I cut him off. Yes, you did. You used emergency access for non-emergency purposes. That's illegal entry. You moved in without the owner's permission. That's trespassing. You lied to multiple people about having authorization. That's fraud. I pulled out my phone. So yes, Daniel. You're absolutely right. We should call the police and sort this out properly. The clearing went silent except for the wind rustling through the pines. You're bluffing, Sophie said, but her voice wavered. I held her gaze and dialed 911. Mom, wait, Daniel's hand shot out, but I stepped back. Sheriff's Department, a calm voice said in my ear. Yes, I said clearly. I need to report a trespassing situation at 4782 Pinecrest Mountain Road. Multiple individuals have been illegally occupying my property for several weeks and are refusing to leave. Mom, please, Daniel's voice cracked. You said to call them, I said to him, phone still at my ear. Let's have everything sorted out properly. The dispatcher was asking for details. I turned away from my son's stricken face and walked toward the lodge, answering questions in a steady voice while behind me, Sophie began to shout, Henry to bluster, and Daniel said nothing at all. The patrol car arrived within 20 minutes, its blue lights cutting through the falling snow like strobes against the white pine landscape. I watched from the porch as two officers emerged, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a stockier man whose nameplate read, Ramirez. They approached slowly, boots crunching through fresh powder, taking in the scene, 3 vehicles, 7 anxious adults, 1 crying toddler. Sophie moved first. She rushed toward them, her face crumpling into tears with theatrical precision. Oh, thank God you're here, she sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. This woman, she's my husband's mother, but I think she's having some kind of episode. She's confused. She showed up last night claiming we broke into her house, but this is our lodge. We've been living here for weeks. The female officer's expression remained neutral. Ma'am, slow down. What's your name? Sophie Hayes. Well, Sophie Marsden now. She gestured toward Daniel, who stood frozen beside his car. That's my husband, Daniel. This is his mother, Lily. She's been through a lot since her husband died, his father. We've been worried about her. And now she's here, making these wild accusations, threatening us, trying to throw us out of our own home on Christmas. It was masterful, really. The trembling voice. The concerned daughter-in-law. The subtle implication of dementia or grief-induced delusion. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. Officer Ramirez turned to me. Ma'am, are you Lily Marsden? I am. My voice was steady, calm. I'd prepared for this. And this is my property. I own this lodge. These people have been occupying it without my permission for 6 weeks. That's not true. Sophie's voice rose to a wail. Daniel, tell them. Tell them this is our place. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His face had gone gray. Sir. The female officer, her nameplate red, chin, focused on him. Is this your property? It belongs to my mother, Daniel admitted quietly. But she gave me access. I have the gate code. She said I could use it for emergencies. And you determined that living here for 6 weeks constituted an emergency? Officer Chen's tone was mild, but her eyes were sharp. We were struggling financially, Daniel stammered. The place was empty. I thought. He thought nothing, Sophie cut in, her tears evaporating into anger. This is a family property. She doesn't even live here. She abandoned it after her husband died, left it sitting empty for a year, and now she shows up out of nowhere acting like we're criminals for keeping it maintained. Officer Ramirez pulled out a notepad. Mrs. Marsden, do you have documentation proving ownership? I'd been waiting for this. I pulled a manila folder from my coat pocket, the same one I'd brought to the lodge yesterday, though I'd updated it this morning with additional materials. Deed, I said, handing over the first document. Property tax records showing continuous payment. Utility bills in my name. Homeowner's insurance. And this, I pulled out my phone, opening the app connected to the security camera I'd had installed 2 years ago at Richard's insistence. Footage from the exterior camera showing my arrivals and departures over the past year. You'll notice multiple visits. The property was never abandoned. Officer Chen studied the documents while Ramirez watched the security footage, his expression growing harder. You'll also see, I continued, footage from 6 weeks ago showing these individuals arriving with multiple vehicles and suitcases. No footage of me granting permission because no permission was granted. Sophie's face went white. There are cameras? At the gate and above the front door, I confirmed. For security. They're clearly visible if you bother to look. Henry Alden stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Now see here, officers. I don't care what some cameras show. We were told by our son-in-law that he had authority to offer us accommodation here. We came in good faith. We've been maintaining the property, shoveling snow, keeping the heat running. If there's been a misunderstanding, that's between mother and son. You can't just throw us out. Officer Ramirez looked up from the security footage, his expression flat. Sir, this footage shows you arriving with luggage and boxes 6 weeks ago. It shows you coming and going as if you lived here. And according to these property records, you have no legal right to be here at all. We were invited. Marjorie protested. Daniel said. Daniel doesn't own the property, Officer Chen interrupted. His mother does. And she's stating clearly that no one had permission to occupy this residence. She turned to me. Ma'am, do you want these people removed from your property? The moment crystallized. 7 faces turned toward me, each showing a different emotion. Henry's indignation. Marjorie's horrified embarrassment. Sophie's siblings' confusion. The toddler's frightened tears. Sophie's rage barely masked by desperation. And Daniel. Daniel looked broken. Caught. Finally understanding that his mother had evidence, documentation, proof. That his lies had been recorded and time-stamped and were now being reviewed by law enforcement. Yes, I said quietly. I want them removed. Sophie erupted. This is insane. You can't do this. Daniel, do something. Daniel just stood there, snow gathering on his shoulders. We have nowhere to go. Sophie shrieked at me, all pretense of tears abandoned. It's Christmas. It's snowing. We have a child, for God's sake. What kind of monster throws out her own family? The kind whose family broke into her home and lied about it for 6 weeks, I replied calmly. You vindictive bitch. Sophie lunged forward, but Officer Chen stepped between us. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Right now. Calm down? She's destroying our lives over a house. A house she doesn't even use. A house she owns, Officer Ramirez said firmly. Mrs. Marsden, do you want to press charges for criminal trespass? I considered. Part of me, the hurt, betrayed part, wanted to say yes. Wanted to watch them squirm, wanted consequences that matched the violation. But I looked at Daniel, saw the defeat in his eyes, and knew that charges wouldn't change anything. They'd only give him ammunition to paint me as the villain in whatever story he told himself going forward. No charges, I said. I just want them gone. Relief flickered across Daniel's face. However, I continued, I'll need documentation of this incident. A formal trespass warning. And I want it noted that they are not to return to this property under any circumstances. Officer Chen nodded. We can do that. Folks, you have 30 minutes to gather your belongings and vacate the premises. If you're not off the property by then, you'll be arrested for criminal trespass. The clearing erupted into chaos. Marjorie burst into tears. Henry, get our things. I just can't believe we were lied to like this. Henry stomped toward the house, muttering curses under his breath. Sophie's siblings scrambled for the minivan, their earlier casualness replaced by frantic urgency. Sophie herself stood trembling with rage, staring at me with such hatred that Officer Chen positioned herself protectively between us. You'll regret this, Sophie hissed. When you're old and alone and dying, when you need family, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember choosing a house over your own son. I'm not choosing a house over my son, I said quietly. I'm choosing dignity over theft. There's a difference. Daniel finally moved, walking slowly toward the lodge. He paused in front of me, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. What could he say? What words could possibly bridge the chasm between us now? He walked past me without a word. I watched them pack. Watched suitcases and boxes being hurriedly loaded. Watched the Aldens argue in fierce whispers, Marjorie's anger at being duped now focused entirely on Sophie and Daniel. Watched Sophie trying to coordinate the chaos while shooting venomous looks in my direction. The toddler, Sophie's niece, I'd learned, wailed inconsolably, not understanding why the adults were yelling, why they had to leave, why everything felt wrong. 28 minutes later, 3 vehicles sat idling in the clearing, engines running, exhaust clouding the cold air. Daniel was the last to emerge. He carried 2 suitcases and wouldn't look at me. Sophie sat in the passenger seat of their car, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. Officer Ramirez approached me with a clipboard. I need you to sign this trespass warning. It formally bars these individuals from returning to your property. If they do, you call us immediately and they'll be arrested. I signed with a hand that didn't shake. The cars began pulling away. First the minivan with the Aldens, Henry driving too fast, spraying gravel. Then Sophie's siblings in their sedan. Finally, Daniel's car, moving slowly, reluctantly. I watched the taillights disappear down the drive, red eyes fading into white. Officer Chen touched my arm gently. Ma'am, are you going to be okay out here alone? Yes, I said. And meant it. If you need anything, more documentation. If they try to contact you, anything, here's my card. She pressed it into my hand. What they did, that wasn't okay. You did the right thing. The officers left. Their blue lights faded. The snowfall intensified, already covering the tire tracks, the footprints, the evidence of occupation. I stood in the clearing for a long moment, letting the snow fall on my face, feeling the cold cleanse something deep inside. Then I walked back into the lodge. The silence was profound. No television blaring. No children shrieking. No Sophie's voice correcting, commanding, controlling. Just the crackle of the fire I'd built this morning and the whisper of wind through the pines. I locked the door. The deadbolt sliding home sounded like punctuation. Like a sentence ending. I walked to the fireplace, where Richard's portrait smiled down at me, young, hopeful, in love. I touched the frame gently. It's over, I whispered to his image. To the room. To myself. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering everything in white. Clean. Pure. New. I settled into the chair Richard had built, pulled his blanket around my shoulders, and let the warmth of the fire seep into my bones. My house. My peace. Mine. I returned to my Denver house 3 days after Christmas. The drive down from the mountains felt different this time, lighter somehow, despite the weight of what I was about to do. The city was still dressed in holiday lights, neighbors' windows glowing with warmth and festivity. My own house stood dark and quiet, exactly as I'd left it. Inside, I turned on only the necessary lights. Kitchen. Hallway. My office. I wasn't here for comfort or celebration. I was here for surgery. I made tea, Earl Grey, the way Richard always preferred, and carried it to the mahogany desk in my study. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, though he'd been gone almost a year. Some ghosts linger in pleasant ways. I opened my laptop and pulled out a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote, Financial Entanglements, Daniel and Sophie Marsden. Then I began to list them. Joint checking account, opened when Daniel turned 18, for emergencies, current balance $12,847. My deposits. His withdrawals. Co-signed auto loan, Daniel's sedan $31,200 remaining. My credit. His vehicle. Co-signed business loan, Sophie's boutique, now defunct $28,500 in default. My liability. Their failure. Monthly rent subsidy, their apartment $1,800 per month for 14 months, $25,200 total. My generosity. Their expectation. Personal loans, various emergencies, $70,000 for Daniel's failed startup, $5,000 for temporary moving costs, $3,200 for Sophie's investment opportunity, $78,200 never repaid. Credit card, added Daniel as authorized user, $8,300 current balance. Charges I didn't recognize for purchases I didn't authorize. The numbers blurred together, $185,947 in total exposure. Nearly $200,000 I'd given, lent, or guaranteed for a son who'd repaid me by lying and stealing. I took a sip of tea. It had gone cold. The accounting was clear. Now came the cutting. I started with the joint checking account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment before I clicked, close account. The system asked me to confirm. I confirmed. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. $12,847 transferred to my personal account. The joint account showed zero. Then nothing. Account closed. One connection severed. Next, the auto loan. I called the bank, navigating the automated system until I reached a human. I need to remove myself as co-signer from an auto loan. The representative, her name was Jennifer, she sounded young, explained the process. You'll need the primary borrower's consent, or you'll need to prove financial hardship caused by the co-signature. The primary borrower used illegal access to my property to live rent-free while I continued making his car payments, I said calmly. I have a police report documenting the trespass. Does that constitute hardship? A pause. Let me transfer you to our fraud department. 20 minutes later, it was done. The loan would be restructured in Daniel's name only. His credit would take the hit he'd been avoiding. His interest rate would triple. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. The business loan was simpler, it was already in default, already destroying my credit score. I called the creditor and requested documentation of the default from my attorney. I'll be pursuing legal action against the primary borrower for fraudulent inducement, I explained. Not entirely true, but not entirely false either. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. The monthly rent deposits took 30 seconds. I logged into my bank, found the recurring transfer, and deleted it, $1,800 that had left my account automatically on the first of every month, gone. The next payment, due in 3 days, would never arrive. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. The credit card was the most satisfying. I called the company, explained that an authorized user had been making fraudulent charges. I'd like to dispute the recent charges and remove the authorized user immediately. Ma'am, if they're an authorized user, technically the charges aren't fraudulent. The authorization is revoked, I interrupted. Effective immediately. And I'd like a new card number. This one has been compromised. $8,300 in charges, luxury dinners I hadn't eaten, electronics I didn't own, clothing I'd never worn, all flagged for dispute. Daniel's access, terminated. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. With each severance, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly. Not satisfaction. Something colder and clearer. The precision of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. The necessity of amputation to save the body. I opened my email and searched for Daniel's name. Hundreds of messages appeared. Years of correspondence. Birthday wishes. Photos of family gatherings. Requests for money dressed up as conversation. Asterisk mom, hope you're well. Quick question about that loan, asterisk. Asterisk hi mom. Sophie and I were thinking about the lodge. Would you mind if, asterisk. Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a tight spot and... Each request followed the same pattern. Pleasantries. Flattery. Then the ask. Then the promise to pay back, to do better, to make her proud. Promises made of smoke. I created a new folder, Archive, Daniel, dragged every message into it. Then I set up a filter. Future emails from his address would bypass my inbox entirely, filing directly into the archive. I wouldn't block him, that felt too dramatic, too emotional. But I wouldn't see his messages either. Wouldn't be tempted by apologies or manipulated by emergencies. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. My phone sat on the desk, silent but heavy with potential. I picked it up and opened my contacts. Found Sophie's number. My thumb hovered over her name. She'd sent texts since the police had removed them. 17 messages, each more vitriolic than the last. You're going to regret this. Daniel is falling apart because of you. I hope you die alone. We'll sue you for emotional distress. Asterisk you're a narcissist. A monster. A terrible mother, asterisk. I didn't read them all. Didn't need to. I selected her contact and blocked the number. Her words disappeared. Her access to me, severed. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. Then I did the same with Daniel's number. That one hurt more. My finger trembled slightly as I confirmed the block. This was my son. My only child. The baby I'd nursed and raised and loved with every fiber of my being. But he'd chosen Sophie. Chosen lies. Chosen entitlement over integrity. And I was choosing peace. Click. Cut, asterisk asterisk. I sat back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen. The financial severances were complete. The communications blocked. But I felt unfinished somehow, like there was one more cut to make. I opened the filing cabinet beside my desk and pulled out a worn cardboard box labeled Richard, personal. Inside were letters he'd written me over the years. Notes left on pillows. Cards tucked into suitcases when I traveled. A lifetime of love documented in ink. I sorted through them until I found what I was looking for, a letter from 2 years ago, written when he was already sick but still lucid. Still Richard. My dearest Lily. Asterisk, I know you're reading this after I'm gone. You've always been too respectful to snoop while I'm alive. I'm writing this because I need you to know something, and I'm too much of a coward to say it to your face while I'm still here to see the hurt in your eyes, asterisk. Daniel is taking advantage of you. Asterisk, I know you don't want to believe it. I know you tell yourself he's just going through a hard time, that he'll mature, that your generosity is helping him build a foundation. But sweetheart, you're not building him a foundation. You're building him a crutch. And he's learning to weaponize your love, asterisk. Asterisk, every time you bail him out, you're teaching him that consequences are optional. That manipulation works. That, mom will fix it, is a viable life strategy, asterisk. Asterisk, please, my love, when I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, we both know that, please don't let guilt fund disrespect. Don't let Daniel's needs drain you dry. You've given enough. You've been enough. You are enough, asterisk. Asterisk, you deserve peace. Protect it fiercely, asterisk. All my love, always. Richard. The letter blurred as tears filled my eyes. He'd known. He'd seen what I'd refused to see. And he'd loved me enough to write it down, to leave me this permission to choose myself. Never let guilt fund disrespect, I whispered, tracing his handwriting with my finger. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I opened my laptop one more time. I pulled up my bank accounts and looked at the balances. With the closed joint account and cancelled subsidies, I had more liquidity than I'd had in years. Money that had been flowing toward Daniel now pooled, waiting for purpose. I thought about Sophie's accusations. Asterisk, selfish. Hoarding resources. Letting assets go to waste, asterisk. She'd been wrong about the lodge. But she'd accidentally revealed something true. I had been hoarding something. Not property. Not money. Purpose. I'd been so focused on giving to Daniel, on being the good mother, the generous mother, the self-sacrificing mother, that I'd forgotten to give to anyone else. Forgotten to give to myself. I opened a new browser tab and searched, Women's Shelter Denver donations. The first result was Safe Haven House, a local organization providing emergency housing for women escaping domestic violence. I clicked through to their website. Read stories of women who'd left with nothing. Women rebuilding lives. Women who valued help because they understood its cost. I clicked the donation button and entered an amount, $50,000. $50,000 that would have gone to Daniel's next emergency, Sophie's next scheme, their next manufactured crisis. Redirected to women who needed it. Who would use it? Who would transform it into safety and new beginnings? The confirmation page loaded. Asterisk, thank you for your generosity. Your donation will change lives, asterisk. Click. Give, asterisk asterisk. Not cut. Give. But give to someone worthy of the gift. I sat in the quiet office, Richard's letter beside me, the laptop screen glowing softly. Outside, someone's holiday playlist drifted through the winter air. Silent Night played faintly, peaceful and pure. My phone buzzed, a notification that slipped through before the block fully activated. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I didn't read the message. Just watched it appear and disappear. Then I powered down the phone entirely. The silence that followed felt complete. Final. I looked at the legal pad, at the list of financial entanglements, each one now marked with a single word, closed. You wanted my world, I whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of my son, to the memory of who we'd been before Sophie, before the lies, before everything broke. Now you can have your own. I closed the laptop. Turned off the desk lamp. Sat in the darkness of my study, feeling the weight of severance settle into something that wasn't quite peace but was close enough for now. Tomorrow, I would call my attorney. Document everything. Protect what remained. But tonight, I simply sat with what I'd done. 7 clicks. 7 cuts. 7 connections severed. And one gift given to women who understood that kindness wasn't weakness, that generosity wasn't entitlement, that help was something to honor, not exploit. I stood and walked to the window. Snow had begun falling again, covering Denver in white. Covering the tire tracks and footprints and evidence that anyone had ever been anywhere. Making everything clean again. Making everything new. 6 weeks passed in a kind of quiet I hadn't experienced since Richard died. Not the heavy silence of grief, but something lighter. Cleaner. The silence of a door closed and locked, of a chapter ended, of a wound finally scabbing over. I spent January in my Denver house, methodically rebuilding my life. I met with my attorney and documented everything, the trespass, the financial exploitation, the years of manipulation disguised as need. She nodded grimly and filed everything away. If they try anything, she said, we're ready. I changed my will. The lodge would go to a conservation trust. My Denver house to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Daniel's name appeared nowhere in the new documents. My attorney didn't ask why. She'd seen enough of these situations to understand. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the years of Daniel's endless crises. Had lunch with my former business partner. Joined a watercolor class at the community center. Slowly, carefully, I began filling the space that had been occupied by worry and guilt and the exhausting work of loving someone who saw love as leverage. My phone stayed off most days. When I did turn it on, I'd find voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, Sophie calling from burner phones, her voice cycling through rage, pleading, and back to rage. I deleted them without listening to the end. Daniel tried email when the block stopped his calls. Subject lines like, please read this, and, Mom, I'm begging you, and eventually just, help. I let them pile up in the archive folder, unread. Whatever he had to say, I'd heard before. Different words, same song. Then, on a gray February morning, my landline rang. I almost didn't answer, hardly anyone used that number anymore. But something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the part of me that still remembered being a mother. Mom. Daniel's voice cracked through the line, raw and desperate. Please don't hang up. I said nothing. Waited. Everything's falling apart. Sophie's parents lost their house, the bank foreclosed last week. Her siblings won't talk to us. The boutique's gone, obviously. The car got repossessed 2 days ago. We're 3 months behind on rent, and the eviction notice came yesterday. He was talking fast, words tumbling over each other. We've got nothing left, Mom. Nothing. No savings. No credit. Nowhere to go. Still, I said nothing. I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have lied about the lodge. I know I should have asked permission. I was wrong. Sophie was wrong. We were both wrong. His voice dropped to a whisper. But Mom, I'm your son. Your only child. You can't just abandon me. Just this once, just one more time, we need help. Please. The old Lily, the one who existed before Christmas, before the lodge, before everything shattered, would have felt the familiar tug. The maternal instinct to fix, to save, to rescue. Would have heard, your only child, and felt guilt like a physical weight. But that Lily had died on a snowy Christmas Eve, watching strangers occupy her sanctuary. This Lily heard something different. She heard the same pattern that had played out for years. Crisis. Desperation. Plea. Promise to change. And underneath it all, the unspoken assumption that Mom would fix it. That Mom always fixed it. Daniel, I said quietly. Do you remember what happened the last time I saw you? Mom, I said I was sorry. Do you remember? I repeated, my voice like ice. Silence. Then, barely audible, yes. Tell me what happened. Mom, please. Tell me. A long pause. Then, his voice thick with something that might have been shame, we were at the lodge. You asked us to leave. I told the police to handle it. To sort things out. You called the police on your own mother, I said. In her own home. Because your wife told you to. Because you chose her lie over my truth. I was confused. I was pressured. Sophie said. You made a choice, Daniel. And now you're living with the consequences of that choice. I took a breath, steadying myself. You want help? You want someone to rescue you from the mess you created? Call the police. Maybe they can help you sort things out. Mom, that's not. Goodbye, Daniel. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I unplugged it from the wall. My hands were shaking, but not from uncertainty. From relief. From the clean finality of it. From the knowledge that I'd finally stopped trying to save someone who only wanted to be carried. I stood in my kitchen, in the house I'd shared with Richard, and felt something settle deep in my bones. I was done. The next morning, I packed a single bag and drove north. The mountain road was clear, the worst of winter's snow melted into muddy runoff. The pine trees stood tall and green against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. As I climbed higher, the air grew colder, cleaner, scented with sap and stone and the particular crispness of high altitude. The lodge appeared around the final bend like a promise kept. My lodge. Waiting. I unlocked the door, new locks, new keys, nobody else's access, and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. Empty, but not abandoned. Waiting, but not lonely. Just, still. I set down my bag and walked through each room slowly, touching walls, straightening frames, reconnecting with the space that was mine. In the weeks since I'd expelled them, I'd had the locks changed, the security system upgraded, the entire property professionally cleaned. Every trace of their occupation had been scrubbed away. But I needed to do more than clean. I needed to reclaim. To make the space not just mine legally, but mine emotionally. Mine spiritually. I started in the master bedroom. Opened the windows wide despite the cold, letting February air sweep through, carrying out the last ghost smells of Sophie's perfume and Daniel's cologne. I stripped the bed, new sheets, new comforter, nothing they'd touched, and remade it with linens that smelled like lavender and fresh cotton. In Richard's study, I unpacked the boxes they'd stored in the basement. His books returned to the shelves in the order he'd preferred. His vinyl collection restored to the cabinet he'd built. His reading chair positioned by the window where he'd spent countless hours with philosophy texts and jazz playing softly. I found the photographs they'd removed, our wedding portrait, family photos, pictures of Daniel as a baby, and hung them back where they belonged. But I added new ones too. Pictures of just Richard and me. Landscapes I'd photographed. Abstract watercolors I'd painted. The walls became a gallery of my life, not theirs. In the kitchen, I disposed of their cheap cookware and restored my copper pots to their hooks. Reorganized the spices alphabetically. Placed Richard's favorite coffee mug, the one Sophie had used and I'd reclaimed, in the cabinet where it belonged. With each act of restoration, I felt lighter. Freer. By late afternoon, I'd done everything I could inside. The lodge looked like itself again. Like us again. I made tea and carried it out to the porch. The view from here had always been Richard's favorite, the sweep of valley below, the march of pine trees climbing the opposite slope, the distant peaks still white with snow. We'd sat here countless evenings, watching the light change, saying little, needing to say little. I sat in his chair, the Adirondack he'd built from reclaimed barn wood, and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. The silence was profound. No television. No voices. No demands. Just wind through trees, the distant call of a hawk, the creak of the porch boards settling. For so long, silence had meant loneliness. Had meant Richard's absence. Had meant the gaping hole where my son used to be. But sitting here now, I realized something had shifted. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like peace. Like potential. Like a canvas waiting for whatever I chose to paint on it. I thought about Daniel's phone call. About his desperation. About the part of me that still ached when I remembered him as a little boy, before Sophie, before the entitlement, when he'd been just my son who needed his mother. That ache would probably never fully disappear. You don't stop loving your child just because they've become someone you don't recognize. But love didn't mean sacrifice. Didn't mean setting myself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Didn't mean funding disrespect, as Richard had put it. Love could mean boundaries. Could mean consequences. Could mean letting someone fall so they might finally learn to stand on their own. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The temperature dropped. I should go inside, start a fire, make dinner. But I sat a moment longer, watching the light change, feeling the cold air on my face, listening to the silence that was mine. Tomorrow, I'd paint. I'd pulled out my easel and canvases from the basement, the ones they'd stored away. I had ideas. Landscapes of the valley. Abstract studies of light through pine trees. Maybe a portrait of Richard from memory, capturing not his features but his essence, his kindness, his wisdom, his steady presence. I had time now. Time that had been consumed by Daniel's crises, by Sophie's demands, by the exhausting work of being endlessly available to people who saw availability as weakness. I had time. I had space. I had silence. I had myself back. As darkness settled over the mountains, I stood and walked inside. Locked the door. Built a fire in the stone fireplace Richard had made. Watched the flames catch and grow, warming the room, pushing back the cold. I settled into the chair beside the fire, pulled Richard's blanket around my shoulders, and let myself simply be. No crisis to manage. No phone to answer. No one to rescue but myself. The fire crackled. The wind whispered against the windows. The house settled around me like a warm embrace. And for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since Richard died, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of possibility. Full of peace. Full of the life I was finally ready to reclaim. I closed my eyes and whispered to the quiet room, to Richard's memory, to myself. For the first time in years, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels mine. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. The stars emerged, brilliant and cold and infinite. The mountain stood silent and strong, exactly as it had for millennia, exactly as it would for millennia more. And inside the lodge, my sanctuary, my reclaimed peace, I sat by the fire and smiled. Free. Finally, completely, beautifully free.